I'm Vicki Hogarth and welcome to Southwest Magazine. My guest today is MLA for Fundy the Isles, St. John West, Andrea Anderson-Mason. Thank you for being here today, Andrea.
I'm always impressed when you get that whole name and title just right. Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited to talk to you, in part because we've just heard about the province's Municipal Reform plan, and I know that it has a lot of impact on your riding and the different municipalities there. Can we talk a little bit about, first to start with, this merger of St. George and Blacks Harbour and what that means for that particular region?
Eastern Charlotte. Well, first I'm going to start by saying I had somebody reach out to me last night and say we had no idea that this was going to happen, this municipal reform. I do want to remind people that this was part of the platform of all parties. I believe all parties were committed to some type of municipal reform because this issue has been plaguing the province for 25 years. So we've all been very much aware that there was something that was going to happen. And yeah, the jokes are running around already about what the name of the area will be. Saint Blacks Beaver. Yeah,
I can tell you that I'm based here in St. Andrews, and we are having Bayside and Shamcook join. They're calling it Entity 56 by the Sea.
Okay, Entity 56 by the Sea. That's
not the nicest ring to it, but I'm sure they'll come up with something better. Yeah. But again, in that particular area, there is obviously you'll have to have a full election, so a lot will be going on.
There will be a lot going on. I'm surprised. You're getting a lot of comments and questions about this?
A lot. So for instance, from your area, again, an election planned for November 2023, or 2022, sorry.
Yes.
So a year from now, we'll be going back to the polls.
Back to the polls.
In the St. George Blacks Harbour, that means electing a whole new council. A lot of people are just wondering about the logistics of what it means. Some areas too, because there's another district that I don't know even what to call it. It's this rural district that, for instance, where was Bocabec going was another question, because it didn't seem to be in the Blacks Harbour St. George zone or the St. Andrews Shamcook Bayside zone. So they're in this rural district who will also have their own representatives. So it's a bit confusing, and I think people are just trying to wrap their heads around, are these wards, these new areas concrete in where they stand, and what does that mean for people that were in LSDs before, and how their taxes may go up depending on where they go?
So it's a really interesting time, because I do find that we need to do a lot of education on what municipal government looks like. I still have people say to me, what's an LSD, what's an RSC, and sometimes I feel like an accountant. You know how accountants always talk in acronyms? We're kind of doing the same thing, and there's a lot of confusion out there. Now, my riding is really neat. I hope people don't mind that I call it mine. I'm a little bit possessive of my area. So my riding is really quite neat because I do stretch all the way to St. John. So in the St. John area, there really hasn't been that much discussion because for West St. John, it's not terribly affected. The next little area is Musquash and Lepreau, and they're quite interesting. They're going to become their own rural community. I have communicated with some people in the area, and there does seem to be general satisfaction because they seem like a good fit. Interestingly enough, they are the second highest tax base in our area, largely due to Point Lepreau, but I, from what I'm hearing, they seem to be quite content with their autonomy. The big controversy does seem to be in Eastern Charlotte. And it's controversial, I think, for a few reasons. So what the provincial government did in deciding how it was going to look was they looked at the school catchment.
Okay.
They looked at identities. And I know there were other areas in the province. I don't want to name too many names and be too specific, but for example, there was one area in the province where there were some communities that were very close to each other, but one was primarily Francophone, one was primarily Anglophone, and it didn't seem to make sense that the two communities would be merged together. But I think that when the provincial government was looking at Eastern Charlotte, that was one of the key things that they looked at was the school catchment and the identity that people had. I do want to pick up, though, on that rural district that you're talking about, because that does seem to be a bit of an issue. There's lots of questions. And I'm going to be honest with you of what my perspective is from a backbencher's position. So a lot of people have asked me about my knowledge of this. There's been plenty of consultation. And I want to give praise to the Minister of Local Government and the Department of Local Government on the efforts that they made. So when I consider any other reforms that have been made in government since I've been really paying attention, I think local government went above and beyond. However, COVID has really caused some issues, and it has hampered what I would have been happy with for authentic consultation. And then the question becomes, so how do you actually do it? You know, do you do it through social media? I don't think that what we hear in social media is necessarily the end all be all. Can you do it through public consultation? Well, lots of times we do those public events and many times people don't show up. So they've really tried, they've made great efforts. I think they did a decent job. As a backbencher, we were given a series of
would it be like
peaks and, of what they were actually, the direction that they were going in.
Okay.
People have said to me, you know, this was all pre-planned, right? This was all, it really wasn't, because I've seen a few different versions of it come to the table. Now, I'm the type of person, though, that in order for me to fully understand something, I need to hold it in my hand, I need to have a highlighter, I need to have pen and paper, and as a backbencher, we don't get that luxury. And I myself, as I'm now going through it, I've seen glimpses of it, I had ideas of where it was going. Now that I'm looking at it, I too am starting to have questions, and so I encourage people that if they're going through this and they have questions, then I want to hear about it, because I'm still here to go back to Fredericton to say, you know what, you guys did a first draft, you need a little tweaking here and there, and I think that there's probably room for that.
One of the biggest questions would be a theme actually yesterday of questions. I had people calling saying, where do I fit in? I'm on Deer Island. Where do I fit in? I'm in Bocabec. And so I'd have to look at this list of, okay. And then there is this district that I don't even know what to call it, that is the rural district. And there's Bocabec's in there, but Deer Island's also in there. So it's quite a big mix, but it's around 4,000 people that are in. And so will they have their own council? How will that work?
So that's a really interesting conversation. I actually saw one of my Liberal colleagues called it the orphanage, right? The kids where we're not really sure where they belong. And I hope that's not offensive. That's probably not politically correct anymore to call it the orphanage, but that's sort of what we've been calling it, the rural district. So can we back up a little bit, though?
Sure.
I did try and do my best as far as consulting with a variety of groups. And I did talk to people in Deer Island. I talked to people in the islands. Whitehead is another one that's sort of in that area. Graham and Ann, you'll see, is completely unchanged.
Yep.
And I listened to the people who lived in those areas, because I don't think it is for me to decide. I think it's for me to be the voice to take back to Fredericton. And I can tell you that what the messages, the good solid messages that I was receiving, I did take back to Fredericton, and Fredericton did listen, especially in the construction. Now, where we go from here, that's a different story. So my view on government isn't necessarily how Fredericton views government. I would like to think that, well, I'll back up. One of the struggles that I found when I was trying to speak with constituents about what municipal reform should look like was it was almost too nebulous, intangible of an idea. And so it was hard to have good conversations about where we should be going, because there were a lot of people who didn't really appreciate that we needed change at all. But when you compare how New Brunswick is organized to other provinces, you can see that we are substantially different. And one of the things that I actually posted on Facebook the other day was maybe one of the things that has hindered us being successful and moving forward is how we're structured. So, but I found it really challenging, and the way I explained it to Fredericton, to my colleagues, was we're asking people to order something, but we haven't given them the menu, right? So they don't know if seafood is on the menu, or if this is, you know, if this is lobster, if it's fish and chips. And so I think it made it really challenging. But now we've actually got a menu in front of us. And people have a lot of opinions.
Right. No, that's another thing. It felt like very abstract to me before as a concept, and not that I didn't think it could be great. In theory, when you saw it this week on paper, it suddenly made sense, but it also raised questions, or maybe for some people, some disagreement about where they belong or where they fit. So is there any wiggle room?
Well, see, that's the problem, right? Is that now the menu's there and people are saying, oh, this is not the kind of restaurant that I wanted at all. And another way that I would compare it is, I think it's like when you're building a house, right? If you're working with an architect, they usually interview you and they get a general idea of what you're looking for, right? So they want to know how many bedrooms you need, if you need a garage, does the garage have to be attached? And then they go away and they draw up the plans. And so this is where we're sitting right now as a province. We've got plans in front of us. And for me personally, I would like to think, now that I'm looking at the plans, that I could make some changes, right? Now I can see they forgot the front hall closet. Right? They need to put that in, right? Oh, look at that. The master suite doesn't have a door on it. I need a door to the master suite. So I personally think that government should be flexible enough to be able to listen to the comments and the concerns and adjust, because I think it's rather presumptuous of us to think that we can roll out one option and have it exactly right.
Okay, so hopefully with these blueprints there is room to redraw the foyer, let's say.
I personally think there should be, because to me that demonstrates good government, right? And so I hope that we can have productive conversations with people. So I had a gentleman call me this morning and I was a little sharp. Sometimes my colleagues say I use a machete when I should be using a scalpel. And so I have to admit, I'm sorry to the gentleman that I spoke to this morning, though we worked it out by the time we got to the end of the conversation. He called and he had several negative comments. And I said to him, hold it right there. I can receive your negative comments, but unless you're going to provide me solutions, we're not going to get anywhere. And so if you have changes that you think we need to make, if you have solutions to offer, I'm here, I will take them and I will push forward with them, because that's my only job as an elected representative. It's not about my own personal opinions, it's about relaying what I hear from my constituents and taking them to Fredericton.
Okay, so why would an area like this merger, do you anticipate, I should say first, some identity issues? Some crises of identity with, for instance, I'm using this so much as an example right now, but St. George and Blacks Harbor, and I know there are other communities put in that, but to me that seems like when you have these two very distinct councils right now, it will be a big merger, it will be a big change next year.
It will, and I work fairly closely with both councils, and even from my own observations as an elected individual of these two areas, they're totally different, right? What Blacks Harbor is doing right now is completely different than what St. George is doing. And even the relationship that I have with the two councils is completely different. So it will be a bit of a challenge to have everybody row together. But at the same time, if you think about it, in this area, we all share similar goals. So for example, tourism. Tourism for Blacks Harbor is going to benefit tourism in St. George. So it would make sense that we're all at the table having the conversations. Recreation is common to all of Eastern Charlotte. If there's going to be something in St. George to benefit recreation, it's going to benefit the kids in Back Bay too. So we share such commonalities. And I think in the past, the communities did see themselves as very distinct, but I think we're growing a generation that doesn't see themselves that way anymore. So all of the kids that we've been graduating for, well, longer, I'll date myself, but I mean, Fundy High School has been there for a significant period of time. If you're graduating from Fundy High School, you don't see the same division as we did when there used to be a school in Blacks and a school in St. George. These kids see themselves as being more from Fundy and from Eastern Charlotte. So there's a different identity now than there even was in the past.
Anyway, you brought up a great point of the school catchment area, and I know there are other factors. Someone brought up something to me yesterday about the St. Andrews Bayside Shamcook riding was, the water supply will now be in, the water supply that St. Andrews uses will now be in the area that it covers. And there are factors like that that must contribute to where these lines are being drawn.
Absolutely. So even when you think about the water for Blacks Harbor, it actually comes out of Penfield. Right? And the water for Beaver Harbor, some of it also comes from out of Penfield. So there are other things that make sense. I hope people are willing to give it a chance, but I also hope that if there are significant concerns that people will speak up.
Right.
Yeah.
So that is a way to dare I say, reach out to you if people have.
Yes. Yeah.
I do see you. I will say I would like to point out to people watching at home that I see you at council meetings across your riding. So you are listening. I know you do, and you do it on a regular basis. So good on you for that.
That is challenging. So, I'm going to go off topic totally for a minute because I know there was a lot of conversation about where I was during the CUPE strike. Was I in my office? Was I not in my office? Right now, we're at the point where the legislature is sitting. So from Tuesday to Friday of every week from now until probably December 22nd, and it's been that way since almost the 1st of November, I have been in Fredericton. So I am actually only in the riding on the weekends and on Mondays. And so it does make it much more challenging for me to be present in the community. And I'm a little sad about that because I would like to be more in the community to hear more about people's response to municipal reform. So thank you very much for doing this because I think it's important that
Last time I saw you, I think we were both on Graham and Ann, so you do.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And I know that there's not a chance that I'm going to make it to Graham and Ann between now and Christmas because Tuesday to Friday, I'm in Fredericton. I don't even usually get to see my family during that time period. So I hope people are patient with me. Send me messages, but I might not get good responses back on a timely basis. But
I do want to talk about health reform a little bit, but when you mentioned what was said online last week, and I know that the online era that we live in, I feel it too. There is a lot of just talking to another woman, a politician, someone in the public eye. There's a lot of criticism that can be said online. Sometimes a lot of things that aren't true. I can tell you just from personal experience, my latest death threat was yesterday over things that I think I'm just saying that are factual. So it is it's a very strange time to be in the public eye, to be doing the job that you do. How do you handle that? And do you fear, as I fear, from what I experience, for me, I worry that it'll maybe have less female journalists, less female politicians, because you will be worried about how maybe something like that could affect your family or whatnot. There is a fear there.
Yeah, and it's a legitimate fear. I personally have concerns for young people. I see some really great people coming up in our municipal politics, people who have approached me about even running for provincial politics in the future. And I do get concerned about how social media may deter people from entering the political arena. Social media by its nature, I'm always fascinated. If I put something very positive on, it might get shared a few times. It might get a few likes. If you see something negative go on, it spreads like wildfire. And it's fascinating to me to watch that. It takes a little bit of effort sometimes to be able to step back and say, you question, right? Or why are people more excited by the negative than they are the positive? At the same time, even with some of this negativity that I've seen as of late, I'm so appreciative of the people who reach out and send the private messages that say, here's what I think, right? People, for some reason, are apprehensive to write about the positivity. So even with municipal reform, we're seeing the negative comments go on, but then usually I'll get the private messages that say, this needs to be done, right? And there are reasons why people don't spread the positivity. And I'll give you an example. It's really hard for business owners to weigh in, as an example, on social media because they don't want to offend anybody, because if they do, it may affect their bottom line. So that's one voice that's absolutely missing out of social media are business owners, because they have to be very careful, right? Or clergy, right? They're missing. There's a segment of seniors are most disenfranchised who might not have access to internet. Their voice is missing. So we have to be really careful to understand that just what is said on social media is not a full picture of our society. It's only a small segment.
So you're going thick skin through all this, I assume, though it isn't taking too much of a toll.
You have to keep a balance. The other thing that's really challenging about social media, which is different, I don't know if I've said this to you before in the past, but I often hear people talk about Sheldon Lee because he was such a respected man. He's still such a respected man in our community. And being in politics during Sheldon's time was totally different than being in politics in my time. So he would have his assistant who would take the messages, and he probably got handwritten letters, And God bless him, because I've always heard he never went to bed until he returned every single call. And I believe that. But in today's day and age, not only do we get phone calls, we get emails. I get messages over Instagram. I get messages from Twitter. I get messages from Facebook. I get people who tag me on social media and expect that I'm just going to see it. And it's almost impossible it is physically impossible to keep up. There are some days where I couldn't even count the number of emails that I get, because what's really popular is if there's a really heavy topic like mandatory vaccinations, we'll get anywhere from 20, 30, 50 emails just on that topic a day. And you don't know if that person's from your riding or from somebody else's riding. And it's almost too much. You can't keep up.
And I'm sure on this topic of vaccines, we've just found out Health Canada has made 5 to 11-year-olds now eligible, so I'm sure this will be another topic, another big
We'll come back
topic.
Another day for that one. We'll come back another day.
Now let's pivot into healthcare reform.
Healthcare reform, yeah.
What is your perspective on what was presented this week? I know Minister Shepherd did a big unveil. Luckily, I think a lot of people in this riding were concerned about hospitals in New Brunswick Southwest closing. Doesn't seem to have anything ERs even in the picture of what's happening. What's your perspective on what was unveiled and how it affects this area in particular?
I think that it's really challenging when a government rolls out a plan. So I do think the healthcare reform can be sharply contrasted to the local government reform. Right? With local government reform, we can look and we see the lines. We're not sure. We're trying to zoom to see where the lines are, but we see really concrete changes. And I think that the announcements with healthcare were much more broad. And I think that people, from what I'm hearing, is they're left with questions of what exactly does it mean? Where exactly are we going? There are certainly some very ambitious targets, but the path is not so clear as to how we're going to reach those targets. So I think there's still a lot of questions left to be answered. I know for myself, I don't have a family physician. Within 1 week, both my husband and I lost our family physician. So we fit into that category that it's a little frightening. Like, you know, I need a prescription refilled right now. I'm not really sure what to do. I'm trying to navigate it. And I have great concerns about how we're going to fill that gap. And I appreciate that the Department of Health is thinking very much out of the box. They're looking at a totally different system where we're going to have access over the phone or online to a healthcare provider. I hope it works, but I am worried that it might not be, it might not meet everyone's need. Like we use the word healthcare, and part of that word care is a very important part of it. And I do worry that, as a lawyer, for example, the way that I had good relationships with clients is that we built the relationship. That's how we were successful. We got to know each other and we developed trust. And I think it's that same sort of relationship that most of us want with our family physician. Now, on the other hand, I'm sure there are some people who will absolutely love the anonymity that they can contact and be in contact with somebody who doesn't really know all their details. But there's certainly another group of society, myself included, where I like to have that relationship with my healthcare provider. So we'll see how this goes.
And for people who, especially Charlotte County Hospital in St. Stephen, I know there was concern prior to the pandemic. There were announcements of maybe potential closures of rural hospitals, but we should feel good that it's staying.
Can we just talk about that for a minute? Okay, so it doesn't totally affect my riding, right? Because my riding starts St. George and goes all the way to St. John. So I don't think that the people in my riding are as invested in Charlotte County Hospital. However, I did have the privilege of working with the riding of St. Croix for a significant period of time after Greg passed away. And I know how important of an issue it is. And I used to say over and over, like a broken record, we can't remove anything more from Charlotte County. Like, we can't close it. And a big part of the reason is because of the proximity of Campobello. So with the greatest of respect, people got to stop talking about closing down the Charlotte County Hospital, because it can't happen. We can't we can't serve people. It has to be there. It has to be there. Now, my riding, we're more concerned about Black's Harbor Clinic. We've looked, we've had a small loss of some services over there. I'm fighting very hard for it. Been talking actually with the Deputy Minister, Dr. Liston, Heidi Liston, and she's aware of it, and we're hopefully going to get through some of those hurdles, because what the department has committed to is that they are going to listen to the people on the ground, and I will hold them to that. So again, it's so important that we actually get to hear from people on the ground so that we can relay that message back to Fredericton.
And not quite on the topic of healthcare, but care in general. We know that the daycare is going to be a new subsidized thing.
Yeah.
There still seems to be a little bit of a holdup, but I understand New Brunswick is a little bit further along than, say, Ontario right now in terms of implementing this subsidized daycare. Do you know where we're at? I know it's a federal thing, but
yeah, you know, it's funny, you hear so much, and then when you get to sit in my job and you get to see the other side, you see how different it actually is. And that's understandable, because when we don't know, we try and fill in the gaps ourselves, and sometimes we end up making up our own stories to satisfy ourselves. And I heard somebody say the other day, the reason why New Brunswick hasn't signed is because they were hoping the Conservatives would win and they wouldn't have to sign. I don't think that's true at all. I actually have had conversations with with early childhood education about the negotiations, and they understand how important it is to have daycare in New Brunswick, but they want to make sure that we get it right. So New Brunswick is fairly unique in that we don't have the same number of seats that other provinces might have. So St. George is a perfect example. We have been struggling, we have been fighting to get a licensed daycare in the St. George area. And I can't emphasize enough how important that is. When I came to the community quite a few years ago, I had 2 small children that I just couldn't find childcare for. And as a professional woman, I remember sitting on the floor in the living room one day crying when my husband came home and saying, I'm going to have to quit my job because I can't find childcare for the kids. And I was a person who had a pretty successful career, and we had the means that I probably could have managed that. But we've got a lot of people who need the daycare, and they need the daycare assistance. So we have to, when we sign the deal with the feds, we have to make sure that it works for New Brunswick.
All right. Well, we are actually out of
No,
time,
get
if you
out.
can believe it.
Really?
But I will have you back again soon,
Okay.
because I know there's so much more to talk about.
I know, because we barely scratched the surface with municipal reform. We have a lot more to say.
I have a feeling that
Okay.
it's going to be an ongoing topic.
Okay. I hope people are interested.
Thank you so much, Andrea.
Thank you.
My guest today has been Andrea Anderson-Mason, MLA for Fundy the Isle St. John West. I'm Vicki Hogarth. Thank you for watching Southwest Magazine.